Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bonnie Vandermeulen, Training Coordinator for Wisconsin Facets. On behalf of our entire Wisconsin Facets staff, I'd like to thank you for joining us this afternoon. Today's webinar is entitled College and Career Ready IEPs, Improving Outcomes for Students Age 3 through 21. Our presenter today for our webinar is Anita Castro. She is the School Administrative Consultant at the Department of Public Instruction, serving on the Procedural Compliance Work Group and the IDEA State Complaint Investigations Work Group. She has been at the DPI since 2000, serving as Assistant Director on the Special Education team for 10 of those years. Anita has 22 years of experience as a special education teacher. She has a master's degree in special education from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and is certified as a Director of Special Education. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today Anita Castro. Anita?
Hi, Bonnie. Thank you, everyone, for participating today in this webinar, and thank you, Bonnie, for inviting us to present on College and Career Ready IEPs. I want to start just by mentioning that College and Career Ready IEPs are for students ages 3 through 21, and I know it says that on the slide, but so often I hear people talk about College and Career Ready IEPs from the perspective of post-secondary education. And although that's really important, we understand that even as preschoolers, we're beginning to develop skills that are going to be used throughout our lives. So, and that will ultimately end in college and career. So when we say college and career ready IEPs, we're not just talking about post-secondary transition, but we're talking about all those skills that are necessary for a student to be successful in life. Our College and Career Ready IEPs came out of the need to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. So the Office of Special Education Programs used to focus monitoring on states very much on compliance and just making sure that states were ensuring that districts were following proper procedures. But now the Office of Special Education Program is putting more of an emphasis on improving outcomes for students with disabilities. So we have refocused our monitoring process in the state of Wisconsin to focus on improving student outcomes. And so we designed this College and Career Ready IEP process to focus on not so much about how to fill out an IEP form, but how to have a conversation and a process that would help to develop a program to enable students to have better outcomes. And our College and Career Ready IEP process is grounded in 5 beliefs, and you see those beliefs here on this screen. So when we're talking about these core beliefs, we want to be sure that everybody is coming from the perspective of having high expectations for all students, because we know that expectations influence academic achievement and functional performance. We want to be sure that we're presenting culturally responsive practices that respect the unique identity of the student and incorporate practices so that all students are engaged in learning. We know that positive student relationships are crucial for having a caring environment and a positive school climate that promotes learning. If a student doesn't feel comfortable in school, they're not going to be able to engage. We know that having family and community engagement is an important piece of improving outcomes for students, and that's why this webinar is so important, because it really helps to emphasize the fact that parents and families are important, and involving the family to support and to reinforce the efforts that are happening in school, and to having their perspective when it comes to developing an IEP is an important part of the process. And finally, that developing a college and career ready IEP is a collective responsibility, and not just in the development, but in the implementation, even more importantly, that both general education and special education need to work together in order to implement the IEP and ensure success for all students. So our CCR IEP process is a 5-step process. And it is cyclical. And so on this slide, you can see that it starts with step 1 and it progresses around through each of the steps. And the order of the steps matter. And so when we do training, we always want to emphasize to start with step 1 and work through the process in a cyclical manner. And I should mention that today we're just going to be spending an hour on this topic, and this is meant to be an overview of the process. Normally we spend an entire day talking through all of these steps, and sometimes we don't even get through all 5 steps even when we use an entire day to discuss them. So you're going to just be getting the basics today, but know that there are lots of resources on the department's website, and I'll show you some of those at the end for you to get more information about these topics. So I want to go a little bit deeper into each of the steps. So the first step is about understanding achievement. So we want to understand achievement of grade level academic standards and functional expectations to identify the student's strengths and needs. So we begin with an understanding of the standards. And these may be the general education curriculum standards, they may be alternate standards, or they may be preschool standards, depending on the student. So in step 1, when we want to understand the academic achievement and functional performance, this is really all about the data. And this is kind of what we would consider the big picture of the student's performance. So when people come to the IEP team meeting, it's important that they come with data, not just their opinions, but to have data to support what they're seeing in the classroom, what they're seeing at home, in the community, in a variety of environments. So reflecting back on that collective responsibility, we want everyone to come to the table with information about the student's performance. You know, what does performance look like in your classroom and at home and things like that. And so again, this is about the data. Typically, we want to start with the strengths of the students. It's always with the student. It's always important to start with the positive. And so to think about and to share what does the student enjoy doing, what are strengths of the student, strengths that can be capitalized upon to help engage the student further in learning. And so when you have a group of people around the table, you're able to identify strengths perhaps in certain environments that other teachers hadn't seen before, and so they can learn from one another in terms of things that they're seeing that help to engage the student. In the past, what we would see in this statement, and I should mention that this is documented on what we call the linking form in Wisconsin, or the I-4, if you're using the state model forms. So what we used to see when IEP teams would talk about strengths had to do with personality traits, like, you know, they're a positive person, or they've got a nice smile, or they're friendly. And those are all great things to know and to talk about, but we want to go a little further beyond that and think about information that will really help to engage the student, like their interests and talents. And families can really help to share what some of those interests and talents are as part of this conversation. And of course, if the student is there as well, we want to be sure to engage the student in that conversation, because obviously they know themselves best and they can share what they believe are their strengths and interests. Also in this part of the conversation, which is the first part of the discussion around the IEP development, is we want to be sure there are multiple sources of data, that we're not just relying on, you know, one day, one point in time that we saw the student do a certain thing, but that we have data from multiple sources. And as I said before, across different environments. We always want to include reading data. Reading right now is an emphasis of our state. through a stakeholder process, we identified that reading was the area of focus that we wanted to put our efforts towards, because we believe that if we could improve reading outcomes, that would have a ripple effect and help to improve other outcomes, including behavior and math and science and social studies. So we're really focusing our efforts on reading. And that was because only 14% of students with disabilities are reading with proficiency. And so we require that districts always include data about reading in this part of the IEP. And sometimes people will say, well, what if the student is reading at grade level? And that's okay. You can still include data to demonstrate that the student is reading at grade level so that that's not an area of concern. In addition, when data is included in an IEP, we want to be sure that the data is understandable to all. So we don't want to just see test scores, because when you have a bunch of test scores in an IEP that are not explained, the person who did the diagnostics and has presented the score may understand what it means, but then the person who picks up the IEP later may not understand if they weren't at the meeting to hear that description. So we always want to be sure that the data is explained in ways that people can understand when they look at the IEP, so that it's meaningful. And we want to be sure that the data is current. So, you know that students are reevaluated every 3 years, but even data from 3 years ago would not be as current as we would want to have during this conversation. So the data should be what's happening now. You know, when teachers come to this meeting, it should be what they've been seeing in the last several months, so that the data is current. For each of the steps, we have created documents. They're called at-a-glance documents, and basically it's a one page on both sides that includes all of the key information about each of the steps. And these are posted on the department's website. If you would go to the Department of Public Instruction's website and just type in college and career ready IEPs, you would find these in our resources section. And each of the step checks includes different points that help to guide the conversation at an IEP team meeting, or that if you were reviewing an IEP after the meeting, you would want to be sure that all of this information was included in the section on student information or present levels of educational performance and functional performance. So in other words, you know, is there reading data? And is that data compared to the standards? So, and that helps a parent to understand, this is how my student is performing, and this is what it looks like compared to their peers, or whatever the grade level standards are for that for the grade in which the student is enrolled. Is there data on functional performance, and is it compared to functional expectations? And we have social emotional competencies that the department has developed that can be used to give an idea of what those expectations are. Is the data understandable? Are strengths identified? And is there sufficient data to help inform the next steps of the process? Here's an example of the types of data that you might see in an IEP, or that we would suggest might be in an IEP. And this is not a comprehensive, this is just a little snapshot of what might be seen, and you can see that it's pretty focused on reading. And we're not saying that that should be the only data in an IEP, but like I said before, because reading is our focus, when we do these trainings, we tend to focus on reading, but you would want to see data in other areas, other academic as well as functional areas. But what this demonstrates here is that during this part of the IEP conversation, you're basically the reporters. You're reporting out the data. You're giving the facts, just the facts, ma'am, as we sometimes say. So we've got at the beginning, we're saying, what is the grade level standard around reading? And then we see data around reading fluency. You'll notice, there's a score there, but then it gives you an idea of what that score means. So it says 102, and we wouldn't even know what 102 means unless we had some sort of an idea. So it tells us that this is a mid-third grade level score, and we would expect that this student really should be more like a 130, which would be like a mid-fifth grade level. And then the types of errors that they're seeing in fluency, the decoding, the miscues, and the substitutions. We've got data around running records. We've got comprehension data here. We've got data about classroom quizzes, and we've even got some data around behavior, how many verbal prompts it's taking for keeping student on task, and then some information about strengths, that the student excels in hands-on classes, doing well in computer class and science labs. So you could see that they could kind of tap into, well, if the student enjoys working on the computer, that might be a way to provide instruction through computer, helping the student to perhaps take more science classes and things like that. So some topics that families might want to think about before they come to an IEP team meeting to help prepare for this type of discussion are listed here. To think about what is your child good at, so that you can come prepared to share that kind of information. What makes them happy when they're working at home? What assignments and areas do you see that they're really engaged in? What types of books do they like to read? Or, if they don't like to read, what kind of movies or TV programs are they enjoying? Because maybe if there's a certain movie series or TV series that they really enjoy, the teacher can find some books or some content that would help to engage the student in their learning that would be similar to that series. So just coming prepared with this type of information prior to the IEP team meeting is helpful. Facets also is a resource for families to help them prepare for the college and career-ready IEP discussion. And you can see here that Facets provides services through a help desk. They have trainings as well. In addition to this training, there are other trainings that are available. They provide individual assistance, and they have a youth leadership development service. And then we have our Wisconsin Statewide Parent Educator Initiative. And this live binder link here actually will take you to a number of resources that are available. There's just a few of them listed here on the screen. They have the positive student profile is basically a questionnaire that you can complete prior to coming to the IEPT meeting to help you think about some of the topics that are going to be discussed, and to have some information ready, that to have some notes that you can look at and help remember what it was you wanted to share before you get to the meeting. The reading survey kind of focuses on reading in the home and what does the student like to read, and things like that. And then there are a lot of links to different pages on the DPI website that you can get to from this live binder. All of the handouts on, like, the beliefs, the core beliefs that I mentioned at the start, the 5-step process, and different bulletins like on free appropriate public education and the Andrew F. Supreme Court decision. So this is another resource for families and others to access. One of the resources that they have on that website is called My Snapshot, and then there's also a student snapshot. And these snapshots, as you can see on the screen, basically are questions that you can fill out, or the student can fill out in advance of the IEPT meeting to help prepare for the discussion. So moving on to step 2, this is identifying the effects of the disability. And this is such an important step in the 5-step process. It really is what makes all the difference in improving outcomes, because it's where we really focus our efforts on why the student is struggling to meet standards. So step 2 is to identify how the student's disability affects academic achievement and functional performance. Step 2 actually has 3 parts to it. And the first part of step 2 is around the effects of the disability. And this is the part where we're really observing specifically the data that has just been reported in step 1. So as I said before, this 5-step process is cyclical and sequential. So from step 1, we've gathered all the data about the strengths and how the student is performing. And now in step 2, we look back at that data to see what it's telling us about how the disability is affecting performance. So we want to focus in on what standards is the student not meeting? Is the student meeting reading standards? Is the student reading, comprehending at grade level? Is the student performing math equations at grade level? Is the student behaving as we would expect a student at this age level to behave, and things like that. So looking back at the data. In addition to that, observing what's happening in the classroom. And hopefully some of that conversation came out during step 1, but reflecting back on, what are teachers seeing in the classroom in terms of performance and functional behavior? And is it consistent across all environments? And if not, what's different in one environment as opposed to another environment? This is also a time to really focus in on what are the concerns of the parent, the family, the student, to be sure that that gets out early in the conversation so that those concerns can be a part of the conversation in terms of the effects of the disability, and then developing a program to address those concerns, and also the areas where the student is not meeting standards and expectations. The second part of step 2 is called a root cause analysis. And this is where we dig deeper into why the student is not meeting those standards. So in the first part, we've identified which standards are not being met, which expectations are not being met. So now we talk about why. Why is the student not meeting that standard? Why is the student not meeting that expectation? And we really dig deep by asking why, and we say 5 times, and that's just kind of a rule of thumb. But the point is that we want to dig deep, and we don't want to just stop at the student isn't meeting standards and expectations because they have a disability. We want to dig deeper into the whys, because we want to be able to identify where to focus improvement efforts. So I have an example of what that might look like. So here is a student, and in the effect part of the conversation, we identified that the student is not independently reading grade level text. And so we would ask, well, why? And the student gets frustrated when required to read independently. So then you dig a little deeper and you say, well, why is the student getting frustrated? Because they have trouble gaining meaning from grade level written material when reading independently, whereas when the text is read aloud, they're comprehending. So then we would dig a little deeper and we say, well, why are they having trouble gaining meaning? And so then by looking at the data and what's going on in the classroom, we would say, well, we're seeing that the student is not reading fluently, that their reading is very stilted, lots of stops and starts, and they're really struggling with being able to recognize the words. So again, we'd ask, let's go a little deeper. Why is the reading fluency stilted? And why are they struggling with word recognition? And we may come up with because they're having difficulty decoding or sounding out the words. And so you can see that you work through this process until you get to a place where you can begin to focus your instruction. So in this particular student, they landed at, because the student is having difficulty segmenting words into syllables and blending syllables into words. Now this is just one example, And obviously this isn't going to be the answer for every student. This is just an example of how you would work through the whys. And what we're trying to show here is that you're following one train of thought kind of to its end conclusion, instead of kind of bouncing around and coming up with a variety of possible ideas, but really focusing on one train. So in this case, it was following this idea of not being able to read, and all the way down to the specific skill level or skill area to begin focusing instruction. And that's called the root cause. So then from we can combine the idea of this root cause with the effect. And we call these sentence stems or sentence starters. So the effect of the disability is how the disability is affecting performance. And then the root cause is really the why or the because. So to put those two thoughts together, we've got the student does not independently read grade level materials, excuse me, because the student is having difficulty segmenting words into syllables and blending syllables into words. So there you can see how the effect and the root cause go together. So then we go on to disability-related needs, and this is really where you kind of synthesize what are the disability-related needs that the IEP then is going to focus on addressing. And I think the sentence stem is really helpful in this regard because it brings the 3 points together. So in that example, you've got you see your effect there, which we talked about previously, and the why. And then the disability related need, focus on what does the student need to improve, develop, or increase. So notice that it's student centered. It's not about what instruction or what services the student needs. It's what the student needs to improve, develop, or increase, or develop, improve, and increase in what area, skill, or behavior. So based on our example, we said that the student needs to improve the ability to segment words into syllables and so on. And you can see that the disability related need evolves straight from the root cause. So it's very linked in that regard. So here are some examples of some discussion topics that a family could think about prior to coming to the IEP meeting again in preparation for step 2. How does the student's disability affect performance in regards to certain academic areas or even extracurricular activities? How is the disability affecting access to peers and positive relationships or independence at home? Is there anything about the student's culture that we need to think about in terms of the effect on the disability? And again, what are the concerns of the family? So from there, once you've identified what the disability-related need is, then we begin to develop the goals. And those come directly from the disability-related need. So we develop ambitious and achievable goals that close achievement gaps and support the unique strengths and needs of the student in step 3. So the goals really address why the student is struggling. It goes back to that root cause or the disability related need. So it's important to look at, and in fact, in the IEP, we require that the IEP team number the disability related needs. And again, these are student focused, so the student needs to improve what? The student needs to increase what? The student needs to develop what? And look specifically at those disability related needs and make sure that there is a goal to address each one of those needs. Now on occasion, there may not be a goal, like if the student needs needs to be able to access the school, and the way that that's going to happen is to provide a specialized transportation, and perhaps the student doesn't need to learn how to access that there's no student-specific goal that needs to be developed, so it's just a service. On rare occasions, that will be the case, but in most instances, all of the disability-related needs will need to have a goal so that the student is developing, increasing, or improving in that area. So that's one of the things we ask IEP teams to do, is to actually link their disability-related need, which is numbered, to the goal that addresses that. And that is a way, kind of as a checks and balance, to be sure to ensure that there's a goal for every disability-related need. And sometimes a single goal will address more than one disability-related need, and that's fine, as long as there's at least one goal that's addressing that disability-related need. So IEP goals have to be measurable, of course. That's something that we've known for decades. But one of the things that we have noticed is that often the baseline and the level of attainment, and then the procedures for measuring progress, have not been aligned. And so what we're really focusing on, even in our procedural compliance self-assessment, which districts go through as a monitoring process, and they self-assess their IEPs, and then the state ensures that that all non-compliance has been corrected through that process. They look at a sample of IEPs, and they look at the goals, and they look at the baseline to see if the baseline and the level of attainment are aligned. And by that, what we mean is that if they say that the student can, let's say, comprehend 4 out of 5 questions at the 5th grade level, then, and that's the baseline, then the level of attainment measure needs to align with that. So we want to see something like, let's say 5 out of 5 will comprehend 5 out of 5 questions at the 6th grade level. So we're showing progress from 5th grade to 6th grade level, and that the measures are comparable, so that you're comparing apples to apples. And then your procedures for measuring progress would be around, comprehension questions, where you're going to determine, how many out of 5, given 5 opportunities, how many times is the student able to comprehend. And we always encourage that multiple opportunities to demonstrate that kind of progress is provided, so that it's not a once in time kind of measurement, so that it's more of an average in terms of the procedures for measuring progress. And you know what, Bonnie, we had talked about pausing from time to time to see if there are any questions. So I think I will do that at this point, because I've covered quite a bit of steps 1, 2, and 3. So if there are any questions at this time regarding those 3 steps, I will go ahead and take those.
So the question that one of the participants had said is, what happens if some of the things in the first couple of steps are not necessarily part of what the school district normally does? How do we encourage them to follow this process?
Well, I would encourage them by sharing the information with them. You can let them know that the Department of Public Instruction has a website with a lot of resources around college and career ready IEPs, and that it is the model that we're promoting to help improve outcomes for students with disabilities. So I think just asking them to, if they're aware of it, and if they have participated in any of the trainings. The Regional Service Network, RSN, provides trainings twice a year regarding those full day trainings that I had mentioned previously around all 5 steps. And then we also have webinars on our DPI website for each of the steps that are about 20 minutes each, that even if they can't go to a training, they could watch the webinars as a staff. So I would just ask them if they're aware, if they've gone to any training, and if not, to encourage them to do so, because it is the model that we're promoting at DPI. And we have done a lot of training with promoting this concept. And so I think most districts are aware and are participating in the training. But if you do come across a district who is not using this process, I would just ask them to consider it.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, great. Okay, so here's the step check for step 3. And again, these are kind of the highlights of what to remember about step 3. So does each goal address at least one skill or behavior associated with the disability-related need? So sometimes we'll see these random goals in an IEP, and it's hard to understand, well, why is this goal here? And I think that comes out of the kind of old thinking and the old way of doing IEPs where, okay, the student has, let's say, a specific learning disability, they're in 3rd grade, and so this is what they get. And it's not a process that they've used in terms of digging into why is the student not reading at grade level, why, digging down into those basic skills that they're missing that need to be focused upon. So occasionally we see these random goals that are not connected to any of the data or the reasons, the disability related needs. So again, just making sure that if you've got, and this would be in retrospect, if you're reviewing your student's IEP and you see a goal in there that has no connection to the disability related needs, that would be something to talk about. Well, why do we have this goal in here? And that's really, again, kind of the backwards way of thinking. But if we're moving through step 1, step 2, and now we're getting to the step 3 of developing the goals flow right out of those disability related needs, which are student specific. The goal should be ambitious and achievable. We're working to close the gap, so we always want to be sure that that the goals are significant in order to close those gaps, but realistic as well. Are they measurable? Is their baseline level of attainment, and are those aligned with each other? And then the measurement tools to measure progress have to be aligned with those. Does everyone understand the goals? And we talked about the fact that some needs may not have goals, like transportation. So here are some topics, again, for families to think about in preparation for this goal conversation. So are there goals needed to address the student's disability-related needs and to meet the high expectations that the parents and others have for the student and the student has for themselves? And we're always hoping to address access, engagement, and progress. If you go to one of these trainings, you'll hear that phrase over and over again, because we want to be sure students are accessing the general curriculum, that they're accessing the regular education classroom as much as possible, that they're engaged in learning, and that they're actually making progress. So these are various topics that you can think about, jot down some notes before you come to the meeting, and it will just help then when you get to the part where the IEP team is talking about goal development, if you've thought about these in the past, prior to coming to the meeting. This is an example of our linking form, the model state form, also called the I-4, where IEP teams document this information of step 2 and then the goals and the services. And what we're demonstrating in this slide is to show how the information is linked. And I had said to you before, I had mentioned to you that the disability related needs are numbered, listed and numbered, and you can see that little piece up in the top part of the slide where those disability related needs would be numbered, and then the goal statement should be linked to those disability related needs. So you can see how the goal then flows directly from the disability related need. So if one of the disability related needs was the student needs to improve decoding skills, then we would expect to see a goal that says the student will improve decoding skills, and then it would provide the baseline of, what percentage or what grade level or whatever measurement they're using for that in the baseline and level of attainment. And that under number 3 there, it's highlighted. That would be where you put the number of the disability related need that's being addressed. And sometimes a goal, you want to break it down further into smaller steps, and that's what benchmarks and short-term objectives are used for. And those are required for students who have cognitive disabilities, but they're also encouraged to be used for any student with a disability, because again, it helps to break down that information into more specifics. And then the bottom half of the slide shows the alignment with the services. And again, on our forms, we have a place where the IEP team shows that the service itself is addressing a goal and a need, so that we don't just have random services in an IEP, but that it's very purposeful in terms of what services a student receives. And so then that brings us to step 4, which is alignment of special education services. So in step 4, we align specially designed instruction, services, supports, and accommodations needed to support the goals and ensure access to the general curriculum. So again, in this step, that now the services are aligned to the disability related needs so that the student can attain those goals. The purpose of the services is to reduce barriers, again, to access engagement and to make progress. And as I said before, all the disability related needs have to be addressed by a service. So they don't all have to be addressed by a goal, but they all have to be addressed by a service. And that's why we've got those, the numbering with the services to be sure that the disability related need has been addressed. So when we talk about special education services, we're talking about supplementary aids and services, and that would be like, extra time on tests or reading aloud, or maybe the student needs to take breaks at a certain time of the day. The services always have to be explained in terms of frequency, amount, and duration, as well as the location of the service in the IEP. For specially designed instruction, that has to do with, this is really the special education part of instruction, and it's always provided by a special education teacher, a licensed teacher. If it's provided by an aide, it has to be under the direct supervision of a special education teacher. Now, reading instruction, specially designed reading instruction, can be provided by a reading specialist, but that's really the only exception to specially designed instruction being provided by someone other than a special education teacher. Related services, that would be like transportation, occupational therapy, physical therapy, things like that. And then program modifications and supports for personnel, what we typically see in that section would be like consultation between the special education teacher and the general education teacher. So those are supports for staff. So here's the main points of the step 4. The step 4 check. So again, making sure that all the disability related needs and IEP goals are addressed by at least one service. Are the services stated? Is there frequency and amount? Location and duration, are they clear? And are we promoting access, engagement, and progress? And supports for staff. So again, these step checks can be used during the IEP team meeting to help remember to talk about these things and to kind of check to be sure that these things have been documented clearly, and also as an after the IEP has been developed to check to see for if all of those conversations occurred and for compliance and for improvement in the future. So again, here are some topics that families could consider prior to the IEP team meeting. What do family members already do at home to support the child in meeting high expectations? What aids, services, supports, and accommodations do you feel have been effective in the past and why? And then how can we develop services and supports for the child in such a way that supports and respects the family's time and traditions? You know, um, for some families, having perhaps a Google Doc to communicate uh, homework assignments or special strategies that the school is using that the family can reinforce at home might be one mechanism to use. Other families might say an email is better, or a phone call, um, or some families may not have time to support or the ability to support instruction at home. So having those kinds of conversations at the IEP team meeting so that the school district is aware how to best involve the family is helpful. And to think about that in advance of the meeting is important. So the final step is step 5, and that's where the IEP team analyzes progress towards the goals. So we analyze progress towards the goal to evaluate what works and what is needed to close the students' achievement gaps. So the purpose of step 5, again, is to review progress. And in reviewing progress, if the student is not making progress, we want to think about why isn't the student making progress, and do we need to make some revisions in the types of services that are being provided, the interventions perhaps even revising the IEP in terms of what maybe we didn't get the disability related need quite right, and we need to go back and revisit that discussion, looking at the data and digging deeper again into why the student isn't making progress and making revisions to the IEP to reflect that new discussion. So it's really a time to pause and to consider, look at the progress and consider if the student is making sufficient progress to meet the goal within the timeline that we would expect. In the IEP, under the goals section of the IEP is where the IEP team documents how often they're going to report out progress to parents. And typically what we see is quarterly, but it doesn't have to be quarterly. It could be more often than that. And so that's really a part of the IEP team discussion to determine how often the IEP team should report progress to the parent. But regardless of how often the progress is being reported, progress really should be monitored on a much more frequent basis. You know, it could be daily, weekly, certainly weekly, to be sure that a student is making progress towards the goals. And then that information is kind of summarized and reported then to the parent on a less frequent basis. So, like I said, perhaps quarterly. And we have two different forms. I don't think I included it in this PowerPoint, but that we have two different forms at the department that can be used to report progress. One is the interim progress report, and then the annual. So in the interim, that's which would be used for like the quarterly reporting, and then the annual reporting has to be done obviously once a year, and that's a required annual report that's given in terms of progress on the goals. And so in each of those reports, whether it's interim or whether it's the annual, there has to be data on the progress, and that data, of course, should relate to the baseline and level of attainment. They have to report out whether or not the student is on target to meet the goal or has met the goal if it's the annual report, whether they have or have not met the goal. And then if the student has not met the goal, then they need to revise the IEP or at least have a conversation about revising services or strategies to help the student make progress. So here's the step check for step 5. Is progress data aligned with the baseline and level of attainment? Are the interim progress reports on each goal included in the review? Was the IEP reviewed annually? Is data from multiple sources? Is the student making sufficient progress? And is there data to support that? And if not making sufficient progress, has the IEP been revised to address the lack of progress? Some topics for families to consider in preparation for this step. What are some ways that you have viewed progress towards goals at home and in the community? What services or supports do you believe have been effective and why? The student is not making progress towards meeting ambitious and achievable goals. What revisions do you think might be helpful? And which adults in school is the student most comfortable talking with in terms of their progress and receiving encouragement and support? So thinking about those topics, jotting some notes down and coming prepared to have those conversations before the meeting is helpful. So I mentioned before that we have a number of resources around college and career ready IEP. This is the resource page, and it's broken down into our full day training, the 5 beliefs, the 5 steps, and then coming soon are the digging deeper topics, and that will be the one that I think I'd mentioned earlier around progress monitoring. We're developing a series of webinars around progress monitoring that will be under the digging deeper. We also have trainings that go deeper into specific areas of disability. For instance, we have training around students who have speech and language impairments or students with cognitive disabilities and how this college and career ready IEP process would work, thinking about students with a specific type of a disability. On the left-hand side of the menu, you see college and career ready IEPs in that. And if you were to click that drop-down menu, it would show you a number of different topics that fall under the category of college and career ready IEPs. There are videos, there's webinars, there's all kinds of information that is helpful here. Another resource that we developed is the CCR IEP Discussion Tool. And this is an online discussion tool that basically allows you to think about these 5 steps from a number of different approaches. You can approach it through the 5 beliefs, looking at like high expectations as you think about developing the IEP. You can look at it through the 5-step process that we've just gone through the linking form that I mentioned a couple of times, or focusing just on reading. So each of those boxes is a different approach to developing the IEP, but it kind of brings you to the same place in that you can fill in information as you go through. Each one of these boxes has series of questions that you can read and answer by typing into the document, and then print out what you have come up with at the end, take it to the IEP team with you, and then have it as a resource during the discussion. This is just one of the videos. I'm not going to play it, but it gives an overview of what is CCR IEP. It's a very kind of simplified overview of the process in just like 3 minutes. It provides what this is all about. It might be something useful to show at like an in-service meeting or just with parents, maybe even to start an IEP meeting to say this is how we're going to run our IEP meeting this time. So are there any additional questions that we have at this time, Bonnie?
Not at this time. I'm wondering if you have any closing remarks that you would like to share with anybody at this time.
Well, this has been a very brief overview of the 5-step process. So again, I would just really encourage you to access the resources on our website. You'll get a much better understanding of the 5 steps and how it works if you have a chance to look at the webinars or just read through some of the one-page two-sided, one-page at-a-glance documents are very helpful. So I just really encourage you to access those, and also to look at the trainings that are available, especially for districts, through the RSNs, the Regional Service Network. Contact your RSN and talk with them about training opportunities. I've appreciated having this opportunity to share this information today, and hopefully it was helpful.
Well, I'm sure it was. I know that I learned a tremendous amount, and I'm sure that all of those that participated did the same. I'm wondering if you can go to your first slide so people would see your email address again, because I know that we added that. So if somebody needed to contact you, I know that you said that that was an option. So if they could just take a look for a minute and see, because that's not on their webinar handout that I have. So again, Anita's email address is posted there. I do have a participant that wanted you to know that she thanked you very much for all this information today. And we thank you as well from Wisconsin Facets. This will conclude our webinar. We'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. Please be advised that Wisconsin Facets has numerous webinars still available to you for the 2019 season, and that we have over 80 scheduled trainings and webinars for 2020. Please check our website calendar and register for any of the upcoming trainings that you feel you might like to participate in. And please watch for the short evaluation that will be coming your way after the end of today's live webinar. Again, thank you so much, Anita, for your presentation today, and thank you all for joining us. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, and thanks again.
Bye, Anita.
Bye-bye.